I never thought love had an expiration date. I never imagined that one day the woman I had built a life with, the woman I had once looked at with complete trust, would reduce our marriage to nothing more than a business arrangement, one where my emotional needs were an afterthought, an inconvenience she no longer had time for. It started with a silence that stretched too long between us, a subtle shift like a house settling in the night, unnoticed at first but impossible to ignore once you realize the cracks in the walls have spread too far to repair. I had been pushing aside the feeling for months, convincing myself that all marriages go through rough patches, that the late nights on her phone, the dismissive way she brushed off my attempts at conversation, and the way her laughter had slowly faded whenever we were together, were just signs of stress, not signs of something deeper. But I was wrong. That night I had been standing in the kitchen watching her make herself a cup of tea just herself. No extra cup for me, like she used to. No glance in my direction to ask if I wanted one. I cleared my throat. "Sheila, can we talk?" My voice was steady, but there was a weight in my chest, a quiet desperation I didn't want to admit to. She didn't look up from her mug, stirring in honey, like my words were just background noise about what us. That finally made her pause, not because she was worried, not because she cared, but because she was annoyed. I saw it in the way her shoulders tensed, the way she exhaled through her nose before finally looking at me. "What about us? LOL. I took a step closer. "I feel like you're not here anymore, like I'm living with a stranger. You barely talk to me. We don't do anything together. And I don't even remember the last time you—" I hesitated. "The last time you touched me, like you used to." Her eyes flickered with something, but it wasn't guilt. It wasn't sadness. It was something far worse. Indifference. LOL. She sighed, placing her mug on the counter with deliberate slowness. "I'm not responsible for your needs." At that moment, something inside me snapped, not in anger, not in rage, but in realization. She meant it. She had checked out, and she wasn't coming back. I had spent years loving this woman, pouring everything I had into this marriage, sacrificing my own happiness at times just to make sure she was okay, and now, she was telling me to my face that my feelings, my needs, my very presence in this marriage didn't matter. The part of me wanted to fight to demand answers, to make her see what she was throwing away. But then I saw the way she picked up her mother again, already mentally checking out of the conversation. She had said what she needed to say, and to her that was the end of it. But for me, it was just the beginning. I turned away without another word, heading for the bedroom. I could feel her eyes on my back, probably waiting for me to argue, to beg to ask her how we got here. But I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. She had made one thing very clear. I wasn't her priority, and from this moment forward, she wouldn't be mine either. She thought she could live without me. I was about to show her exactly what that felt like. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet sounds of the house that once felt warm but now felt like a prison. I could hear the faint hum of the fridge, the occasional creak of the floorboards as Sheila moved around in the other room, and the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. A reminder of how slowly time passed. When you were trapped in uncertainty, I kept replaying her words over and over in my head. "I'm not responsible for your needs." Maybe it would have hurt less if she had shouted at it in anger, if it had been a product of some heated argument where emotions ran high. But that wasn't the case. She had said it like a fact, as casually as someone commenting on the weather. She had checked out of this marriage, and I was just now realizing how far gone she already was. I turned my head slightly and glanced at the empty space beside me. It used to be where she curled up against me, where I would wake up to find her still half asleep, her face nestled into my shoulder. I used to love those mornings, those quiet, unspoken moments where nothing needed to be said, because I could feel her warmth, her presence now that space felt colder than ever. A reminder that even when she was in the house, she was already miles away from me in her mind by the time morning came. I had made a decision. I wasn't going to beg for her attention anymore. I wasn't going to chase after her trying to make her love me again. She had made her choice, whether she realized it or not. Now it was my turn to make mine. I got up, showered, and got dressed like any other day. But something was different. There was no point in pretending anymore. I walked into the kitchen half expecting to see Sheila sitting at the table with her coffee, scrolling through her phone like she usually did. But she wasn't there. The chair she always sat in was empty, and the silence in the room felt heavier than it should have. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood by the window watching as the early morning sun cast long shadows across the backyard. I used to love this house. We had picked it out together, decorated every room, made it a home, but now felt like a museum full of memories that no longer felt real. A place where love had once lived but had long since faded. Just as I was about to sit down, I heard the front door open. Sheila walked in, looking way too put together for someone who had supposedly just gone on an early morning walk. Her hair was perfect, her makeup fresh, and there was a lightness in her step that I hadn't seen in months. I set my coffee down and folded my arms. "Where were you?" She barely spared me a glance as she dropped her bag on the counter just out. "Needed some fresh air." Fresh air, right. I wanted to ask more, but I already knew the answer. I had seen the signs for months. Her distance, her secrecy, the way she always seemed to be somewhere else, both mentally and physically. "You didn't come to bed last night," I said, watching her closely. She shrugged. "I stayed up watching a show, fell asleep on the couch." Another lie. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of reality settle in. I could have confronted her right then, demanded the truth, made a scene, but what would be the point? She had already made it clear that I wasn't a priority, that my needs, whether emotional or otherwise, were none of her concern. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the bitterness ground me. "All right." I said simply that one word must have caught her off guard, because she finally looked at me, her brows slightly flared. "All right," I nodded. "Yeah, if that's how things are, then all right." For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, uncertainty. Maybe she had expected me to fight, to argue, to beg for some kind of explanation, but I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Sheila stared at me for a moment longer, then picked up her bag and walked out of the kitchen without another word. And just like that, I knew things would never be the same again. But this was only the beginning. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to demand answers. But I was done being the man she could ignore. If she wanted to live in a world where I didn't matter, I would show her what that actually felt like. She thought she could live without me. I was about to let her find out exactly what that meant. There was a time when I could read Sheila like an open book. I used to know what every sigh meant, what every little shift in her expression was trying to hide. I could tell when she was upset, even when she pretended not to be. And I always knew when she needed comfort before she ever had to ask for it. But now I didn't know who I was looking at anymore. That morning, after she walked out of the kitchen without a word, I sat there for a long time staring at the coffee in my hands. The silence stretched through the house, settling into every corner like a fog. It wasn't just the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of something breaking apart in slow motion, something that had already started falling before I even realized it. The thing is, I wanted to be angry. I wanted to demand answers, to call her out, to make her look me in the eye and tell me the truth, but what good would that do? I already knew. Maybe I hadn't seen the exact evidence, but I didn't need to. The way she acted, the way she dismissed me so easily, the way she suddenly had places to be early in the morning when she used to sleep in on weekends. All of it was enough. I had spent months trying to reach out to her to fix whatever was wrong. I had given her patience, space, understanding. But now I understood something I should have realized a long time ago. She wasn't lost. She wasn't confused. She wasn't going through some emotional struggle that I needed to help her with. She was just done, and she had been done long before I ever realized it. That was the part that stung the most. The realization that while I was lying awake at night worrying about us, she was out somewhere else, living her life without a second thought. While I was trying to hold on, she had already let go. That evening, she came home late again, the third time that week. I didn't ask where she had been. I didn't even look up from the book I was pretending to read on the couch. She walked past me like I was a piece of furniture, barely acknowledging my presence. As she made her way to the bedroom a few minutes later, I heard the shower turn on. I closed the book and exhaled slowly. I could have asked her where she was. I could have confronted her. But instead I got up, grabbed my car keys, and walked out the door. I drove around for a while, aimless, just trying to clear my head. The roads were empty, the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. I passed by places that used to mean something to us. Our favorite diner, the small bookstore where we used to spend entire afternoons, the park where we once talked about our future like we had all the time in the world. It felt like looking at someone else's memories, like those moments belonged to another couple, another version of us that no longer existed. I pulled into a parking lot near the lake and sat there for a long time watching the water ripple under the moonlight. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself think about what came next. I had been holding on for so long, trying to convince myself that I could fix this, that if I just tried harder, if I just found the right words, I could bring us back to what we used to be. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was I was the only one still holding on. And maybe it was time to let go. When I finally got home, Sheila was already in bed. The covers pulled up around her like a barrier. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just looking at her. She didn't even stir. I climbed into bed on my side, staring at the ceiling, the space between us stretching wider than it ever had before. I had always thought that love died in big dramatic moments, screaming fights, betrayal, confessions that shattered everything. But now I realized the truth. Love didn't always die in fire. Sometimes it just faded into nothing. And that was exactly what was happening to us. The days blurred together after that, a monotonous cycle of empty conversations, silent dinners, and nights spent lying awake, wondering how much longer I could pretend that what we had was still salvageable. If I had any lingering hope that Sheila and I could find our way back to each other, it vanished. The moment I realized something unsettling. I had become a ghost in my own home. She moved through the house like I wasn't even there. She came and went as she pleased, never offering an explanation, never showing the slightest interest in where I was or what I was doing. At first, I told myself that maybe I was imagining it, that I was overanalyzing things like I always did. But one night I tested it. I sat at the kitchen table watching her move around the room, making herself a cup of tea. She didn't say a word to me. Not even a glance, Sheila. I finally said, my voice cutting through the silence. She paused, barely. Yeah. I stared at her, waiting for her to look at me, to acknowledge me beyond that distracted response. But she didn't. She kept stirring her tea. Like the conversation was already over nothing, I muttered, shaking my head. She nodded absently and walked away, just like that. I sat there for a long time after she left the room, staring at the untouched plate of food in front of me. I was done not just with her, not just with the marriage. I was done pretending that this was anything other than what it was. A few nights later, the breaking point came. Sheila came home late again. I was sitting on the couch when I heard the door open. I didn't turn my head, didn't acknowledge her. I just listened to the sound of her heels clicking against the floor, the soft rustling of her coat as she slipped it off, the faint creak of her bag being placed on the counter. And then the sound that made my stomach twist, the vibration of her phone, followed by a barely audible giggle. Something inside me snapped, but not in anger. It was something worse. Realization. I turned my head slowly, catching the way she smiled down at her phone, her thumb moving quickly across the screen. She hadn't smiled like that in months, not around me. "Good night," I said, my voice colder than I intended. She glanced up, startled, like she had forgotten I was even there. "Huh? Oh yeah, night." And just like that, she disappeared down the hallway, her phone still in her hand, that smile still on her face. I sat there for hours after she had gone to bed, staring at the dark screen of the television, my mind replaying every single moment that had led us here. The excuses, the distance, the indifference. I wasn't stupid. I knew what was happening. But the worst part? It wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the fact that she didn't even feel the need to hide it anymore. She didn't care if I knew. And if she didn't care, then why the hell was I still here? That was the night I decided to disappear too. Not in the way she had emotionally checked out, leaving me in the dark. No, I would do it in a way she would feel, a way that would make her realize what it truly meant to be alone. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to fight. I was just going to leave. And when I did, I wouldn't look back. That night I barely slept. I lay there in the darkness, listening to the faint sound of Sheila's breathing beside me. It was steady, peaceful, completely unaffected by the emotional wreckage she had left in her wake. Meanwhile, my mind was raised, tangled in the suffocating realization that I had been living a lie for far longer than I wanted to admit. Sheila had already moved on. Maybe not physically, not yet, but emotionally, mentally. She had stepped out of our marriage long before I even saw the signs. And that giggle, that damn giggle at her phone was the final nail in the coffin. I turned my head slightly, watching her silhouette in the dim glow from the window. A part of me wanted to shake her awake, to ask her outright, who is he? How long has this been going on? But what would be the point? The truth was already there, written in the way she barely acknowledged me, in the way she stayed out later and later without so much as an explanation. The truth wasn't something I needed her to confess. I already knew the anger that had been building inside me over the past few weeks didn't explode like I thought it would. Instead, it settled into something much colder, something that made me feel oddly calm. I wasn't going to fight for her. I wasn't going to beg for answers. I was going to walk away just like she had, but, unlike her, I was going to do it in a way that would make her feel my absence. By the time morning came, I had already made up my mind. I got up early, showered, got dressed, and started making preparations. I had spent too many years tying my happiness to someone who saw me as nothing more than background noise. It was time to take back control. Sheila walked into the kitchen as I was pouring my coffee. She looked different, relaxed, almost glowing. I had spent too much time analyzing every little thing about her these past few months, and now it all made sense. She wasn't stressed. She wasn't distant because of work or some personal struggle. She was happy, just not with me. She didn't even look at me as she reached for a mug and filled it with coffee. No good morning. No, how did you sleep? Nothing. I let the silence stretch between us, taking one last good look at the woman I had spent years of my life devoted to, the woman who at one point had been my entire world. And then, just like that, I felt nothing. "Sheila," I said, evenly setting my cup down. She glanced up, eyebrows raised, and I studied her for a moment, wondering if there was even a single part of her that still cared. If there was, she hid it. "Well, I'm going to be gone for a while." I said. That got her attention. Her forehead creased slightly. "Gone? Where?" I shrugged. "Just gone." She stared at me, searching for some kind of explanation, but I wasn't giving her one. Not this time. "You're being weird," she muttered, turning her focus back to her coffee. Maybe I grabbed my keys off the counter and walked toward the door. I expected her to say something to stop me, to ask when I'd be back. She didn't, and that was all the confirmation I needed. I left without looking back as I drove. I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel sadness. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Sheila wanted a life without me. She was about to get exactly that. The road stretched out before me, endless and unfamiliar. The moment I pulled out of the driveway, something inside me shifted. There was no dramatic music playing, no slow-motion montage of my life flashing before my eyes. Just the quiet hum of the engine and the steady beat of my own heartbeat, as I left behind everything that had defined me for the past decade. I didn't have a destination in mind. I didn't need one. I just needed to be somewhere that wasn't my house, a house that had become a shell of what it once was, filled with nothing but cold, silence, and memories that no longer felt like my own. As I drove, my thoughts bounced between past and present. It was strange how, when you finally accept something is over, the memories start flooding back all at once. I remembered the first time I saw Sheila. We met at a bookstore. She had been standing in the aisle flipping through a novel with this concentrated look on her face, biting her lower lip, and thought I had made some lame comment about that being a great book, even though I had never read it. She saw through the lie immediately, but instead of calling me out, she laughed and handed it to me, then read it. She had said, smirking, "And if you hate it, at least you'll have an excuse to talk to me again." And I did read it, the whole damn thing, and I hated it, but I didn't care, because it gave me an excuse to see her again. That was a lifetime ago, that bookstore version of Sheila, the woman who had laughed at my dumb attempt at flirting, the woman who had been so full of life and curiosity. She wasn't the same woman who had stood in our kitchen that mornings, barely acknowledging me as I walked out of her life. Had she changed? Or had I simply been too blind to see who she truly was? All along, the thought made my chest tighten. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt. It was the realization that I had spent years loving someone who had never truly valued me. I pulled into a gas station after a few hours on the road, stepping out into the crisp morning air. The world around me felt so normal. A mother and her 2 kids were piling into their SUV. A truck driver was filling up his tank. An elderly couple was sharing a quiet breakfast inside the tiny diner next to the station. Life kept moving. It was a cruel kind of irony how the world didn't pause just because yours was falling apart. I walked into the convenience store, grabbed a coffee, and sat down at one of the metal picnic tables outside. I had my phone in my pocket, but I didn't check it. I didn't expect Sheila to call, and honestly, I didn't want her to. For years I had let my happiness depend on her attention, her affection, her approval. But sitting there watching the sun rise over an unfamiliar road, I realized something. I didn't need her. Maybe I had convinced myself that I did. Maybe I had spent too much time trying to fix a broken relationship, thinking that if I just loved her enough, she would love me back the same way. But love wasn't supposed to be A1A Street. It wasn't supposed to feel like begging for scraps of affection. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for her to notice me. I wasn't waiting for her to apologize. I wasn't waiting for her at all, and I wasn't going back. Not yet, at least. I had spent so much time trying to be the perfect husband, trying to be what she needed. But what about what I needed? What about the version of me that existed outside of being someone's husband, someone's afterthought? I had no idea where I was headed, but for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare me. It felt like freedom I never expected to hear. From Sheila that day or the next, or even the day after that, and yet every time my phone vibrated, a small, bitter part of me wondered if maybe, just maybe, she had realized what she had done. If she had noticed the absence of my voice in the house, the way the morning coffee was only for one, the way the silence had finally settled in like a thick fog. She couldn't escape, but the screen never showed her name. I had driven for hours with no real destination, letting the road stretch endlessly before me. Every town I passed through felt like a glimpse into another life. Another version of me who might have ended up somewhere different with someone different. By the third day, I found myself in a small coastal town that I didn't even know existed. It was quiet, the kind of place people retired to when they wanted to escape the noise of the world. There was something peaceful about it, something that made me pull over and check into a tiny motel by the water without thinking twice. The room was nothing special, a bed, a wooden dresser, a small window that overlooked the ocean, but it was mine, just mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't sharing space with someone who barely acknowledged my existence. That night, I sat on the small balcony staring out at the waves crashing against the shore. It was strange how loud the ocean was, how it filled the silence in a way that didn't feel suffocating. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for someone to fill the space beside me. I wasn't waiting for Sheila to come home. I wasn't waiting for her at all. I took out my phone, scrolling through my M calls. A few from coworkers, one from my brother. But nothing from her, not a single message, not a single inquiry into where I had gone. I should have been angry, maybe even heartbroken, but all I felt was confirmation of what I already knew. She had let go a long time ago. She was just waiting for me to figure it out. The next morning I took a walk down by the shore. The air was crisp, the salt of salt heavy in the wind. I passed a few locals, an old man walking his dog, a woman opening up a small cafe. Life was quiet here, uncomplicated. I sat on a bench overlooking the water, my mind drifting to the past. I remembered when Sheila and I used to take weekend trips to places like this. She had always loved the ocean, the sound of the waves, the feeling of sand beneath her feet. I used to love watching her, the way her eyes lit up, the way she laughed so easily. Back then, somewhere along the way, that laughter had faded. Somewhere along the way. So had we. I don't know how long I sat there, letting the memories come and go like the tide. But eventually I pulled out my phone, staring at the screen for what felt like an eternity. And then, for the first time since I left, I sent her a message just so. You know I'm not coming back anytime soon. No anger, no explanations. Just the truth. I sat there watching the waves, waiting for a response. Minutes passed, then an hour, then 2, and nothing. That silence told me everything I needed to know. I put my phone away and stood up, letting the wind whip against my face. I wasn't going to wait for her anymore. I was done being the man she barely noticed. It was time to start noticing myself. The message stayed unread. The hour stretched into a full day, then 2, then 3, and yet I didn't feel the gut-wrenching pain I had expected. I wasn't counting the minutes, wasn't staring at my phone, waiting for Sheila's name to pop up, with some desperate attempt to bring me back. Because deep down I knew she wouldn't. And that realization didn't destroy me. It freed me. The old version of me. The one who would have been over backward to salvage a love that no longer existed was gone. The man who had spent years putting someone else's happiness before it, his own, had finally stepped out of the shadow of his own neglect. The small coastal town I had stumbled into started to feel like home in a way I hadn't expected. I found myself waking up early, walking along the shore as the sun rose over the water. The air was fresh, untouched by the weight of the life I had left behind. The motel owner, an older man named Rye, had noticed that I was in just passing through and offered me a month's stay at a discount. I took it without hesitation. I wasn't ready to go back. Maybe I never would be. On my 4th day there, I wandered into a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and an art shop. It was one of those places that smelled like fresh pastries and espresso, with wooden tables that had probably been there for decades. New in town, I looked up to see a woman standing behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. She had kind eyes, the kind that looked straight through you without judgment. Something like that, I said. With a small smile, she nodded, not pressing for more coffee. Yeah, black as she poured. I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't in years. No expectations, no weight on my shoulders. Just a simple moment of connection with someone who wasn't tangled in the mess I had left behind. "What brings you here?" she asked, setting the cup in front of me. I hesitated, then shrugged. Needed a change. She studied me for a second, then smiled. "Well, this is a good place for that." I took a sip, the warmth spreading through me. She was right. That evening, as I sat on the motel balcony watching the sky shift into deep hues of purple and orange, my phone vibrated. I glanced at it, expecting another work message or something unimportant, but there it was, Sheila. "So that's it? You just disappear?" I exhaled, slowly rereading her words. Months ago, I would have dropped everything to respond, to explain myself, to try and fix something that wasn't fixable. But now I let the message sit there, untouched. Sheila had made her choice, and now I was making mine. Instead of replying, I set my phone down, leaned back in my chair, and let the cool ocean breeze wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. For the first time in years, I felt like me. And for the first time in years, I wasn't chasing someone else's love. I was choosing my own.